So we've been looking at a lot of the biblical data and stuff on a factual level, but I just wanted to go up, given the facts that we have related to Jesus' death and resurrection. Um, what are some of the, out of the various natural explanations that attempt to try to explain this data? I'm kind of curious, like, what do you think of these natural explanations? Are they all just utter failures? Do some perform better than others? Like, what is your take on some of the skeptical attempts trying to explain the facts that we have?
Yeah. So far as I can see, they're all utter failures.
Yeah.
Um, the idea of the swoon theory is an old view, but it doesn't account for the nature of crucifixion. It doesn't account for uh, how's he going to move the stone that takes several people to. I mean, it's like a couple 100 pounds. Who's going to? Uh, and then
That would be a miracle in itself, I'll just say.
yeah, and then he continues to survive. He doesn't just drop over dead. But then where is he? How come they don't say, yeah, he's alive from the dead and here he is. Let's follow him. They say, well, we saw him go up to heaven. And then we have, all these things about the exalted Christ all through the New Testament where he's reigning from heaven. Uh, Going back to Psalm 110, verse 1, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. But, you know, the body's missing and people believe they've seen him alive from the dead and he's not still here. So the stolen body idea, there weren't there weren't very many stolen bodies in Judea and Galilee. I mean, it's not to say nobody ever stole bodies, but normally tomb robbers, which weren't very common in Judea and Galilee, but in the broader world, if they thought it was a rich tomb, sometimes people would rob the tomb, but it wasn't the body they were normally looking for, unless they wanted it for witchcraft, and so, okay, well, Jesus was this powerful sorcerer. Let's, take pieces of his body, whatever. But again, it was very uncommon, and it doesn't explain the resurrection appearances.
Yeah.
Unless you say, okay, well, maybe the disciples stole the body and they all lied about it. They all colluded to say that Jesus rose from the dead. Well, why would they do that? They weren't being hunted down at this point, but they're going to get themselves hunted down for claiming that. And we know that they faced persecution. Again, even if you only accept Paul's letters, one of his earliest letters, First Thessalonians, he talks about persecution in Judea. One of his other earliest letters in Galatians, he talks about persecution in Judea and that he was one of the ones doing it.
Right.
Uh, and he talks about that elsewhere. We've mentioned in uh, other connections.
Mhm.
So that doesn't make sense. They would have to all be suicidal or masochistic, and I mean, especially Jesus was executed on the charge of treason against the majesty of the emperor. He was executed on the charge of claiming to be king of the Jews, which the disciples obviously didn't get the idea from Pilate. Pilate didn't get the idea from the disciples. Connect the dots, goes back to Jesus. Somebody leaked the, uh, I guess, the inside information. Actually, toward the end, he was talking about it anyway, but um, uh, that would be really fun to go into the more details on that. But just trying to stick with where we're at because I would not be a good railroad conductor. I lose my train of thought. I don't have a one-track mind. I
That's yeah, you in
too
a
ADHD.
totally, yeah, that's totally fine. That you guys are like brilliant, right? 'Cause you come up with a million different ideas and stuff like that. So
But where was I before I went off track?
yeah, well, I think you covered the swoon theory, you covered the stolen body.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hallucinations. Now, hallucinations could explain the uh, hallucinations don't explain the appearances very well, but if they did explain the appearances, they still don't explain the empty tomb. So you'd have to combine them with one of the other extremely unlikely possibilities. That well, the swoon theory, you couldn't even. It'd have to be a stolen body plus a bunch of hallucinations. Maybe the stolen body sparked off the hallucinations. But again, it's not just one or two people having hallucinations. You've got a bunch of people having them on multiple occasions, sometimes multiple people at once. I mean, you got a room full of people tripping on LSD. They're all not all going to hallucinate the same thing. All listening to Led Zeppelin, but they're not all going to hallucinate the same thing.
Yeah.
Uh, and some people, one, one, there have been comparisons some people have made with Marian apparitions,
Yeah.
where you do have multiple people seeing Mary at once. But again, we're assuming that that's a hallucination. What
Right.
if it's really an apparition? Uh, something more veridical, maybe not physical, but veridical.
Could be an
So,
objective vision is what.
yeah, because psychologically, it's so unlikely that something like this would happen with more than one person at a time. Uh, and the idea of bereavement hallucinations, again, with all these people, and if we take the Gospels as evidence, multiple uh, multiple senses happening, and also for all 12 plus the 500 and so on. I mean, the 12, most disciples back then were teenagers. Peter may have been a little bit older, maybe over 18 because he was married. Uh, but most disciples in antiquity were teenagers, and teenagers aren't usually the ones known for having that kind of hallucination. Now, it is possible. Well, I think it was past teenager. I think one time I went to work, I was working maintenance, and I hadn't had enough sleep. Yeah,
Okay.
lack of sleep, and I'm sure the disciples did have lack of sleep at that point. But again, to all hallucinate the same thing, and it
Yeah.
just doesn't. And then to
Even
be
with social coordination and contagion, you still wouldn't expect to get everyone seeing the same thing at the same time.
and they're also certain about it, that they are prepared to die for their testimony. Certainly, they're being persecuted for it, and some of them certainly did die for their testimony. And you've got Paul, who's completely turned around. Yeah, the none of the explanations, naturalistic explanations, work nearly as well. Occam's razor. Now, Occam's razor can be kind of a dull blade at times, but I mean, with all the evidence put together, the only reason not to accept the resurrection hypothesis would be if you are certain that there's no such thing as God, or no such thing as anything supernatural. Otherwise, a supernatural explanation, it's a whole lot, um, requires a whole lot fewer leaps of logic to illogical things.
Well, that's a perfect segue, right? Because that's exactly what the skeptics say with my next question here. What one thing I own your 2 volume work on miracles, so that I would love to again, if I'm not annoying you, hopefully you're having a good time. You're welcome back to discuss those books specifically if you'd like. Because I have a friend who's writing his own book on miracles and stuff as well. So maybe you can come back on a future show, but for this episode, I just want to briefly ask you because look, the number one objection among people, atheists, to scholars like Bart Ehrman, um, they don't really like to get into theories and try to explain the facts. They just say, well, we don't know. It was too long ago. But I do know it wasn't a miracle because miracles are a priori impossible. So, you've written extensively about this argument from David Hume and other skeptics today who kind of assume a naturalist or naturalism kind of worldview where miracles can just be dismissed right off the bat. So I want to turn it over to you. Like, what isn't this a good objection? Why would we assume that miracles are possible or let alone the most probable explanation for something?
claiming that miracles are impossible, like claiming that miracles happen, are both presuppositions, they're both assumptions. If you want to actually have an intellectual discussion, an academic, open-minded, fair discussion about whether or not miracles happen, then let's look at evidence regarding them. But most people today who deny that miracles happen a priori are assuming that David Hume, or they're assuming that somebody, maybe they don't know the name of David Hume, but ultimately the arguments go back to David Hume. David Hume actually didn't come up with the arguments himself. He's recycling earlier deist arguments, as I think it's Robert Burns showed in a dissertation um, several decades ago. Just sometimes word for word. They didn't have the same plagiarism requirements back then.
That's not
But
the is that the book Hume's Abject Failure
no,
or
no, no. That one was by John Ehrman, Earman. Yeah, Hume's abject failure, his argument for miracles, and then somebody uh, critiqued the book saying, "You just told that because you're a Christian." To which Ehrman said, "Actually, I'm not a Christian. I just thought it was his worst argument." But anyway, yeah, he published that with Oxford, and there are other major university press publications challenging Hume's argument. And of course, it gets debated back and forth. But uh, Hume borrowed a lot from the deists, and that's why some things don't seem to make sense in his argument, because there are gaps where he's just assuming certain deist premises that he doesn't feel he needs to state, because it was kind of, some of it was in the air. But Hume is the one who really made a splash with it because of his authority on other things. His skeptical epistemology really influenced a lot of philosophy for a long time. Although this particular essay contradicts Hume's normal epistemology, his normal way of trying to figure out truth. And
Mhm.
so Hume makes an a priori argument rather than looking at experiences in this case. Now he's got two sections of his argument. The first section is that miracles are violations of natural law, which is, and he says natural law can't be violated, therefore miracles can't happen. That's just a play on, he's playing with words, and he's using a definition of natural law that doesn't fit the descriptive understandings of natural law today. It also didn't fit the understanding of natural law in his day, because he's following Newton, but Newton and his early followers all believed in biblical miracles. So they weren't saying these things didn't happen because we hold this mechanistic view of nature. They said God is the legislator of natural law. He's not bound by it. He can act within it anytime he wants to. If I drop this pen and then catch it, I haven't violated the law of gravity. I've acted within nature. What kind of God would be less powerful than us? I mean, why worship a God that's less powerful than us? So that argument that Hume raises doesn't actually challenge any theistic view of God. Would challenge a deistic. If you start with deistic or atheistic premises, maybe it works, but not for a theist. So, um, and actually, the idea that miracles are violations of natural law itself is a controversial premise. People before him, like Augustine and Aquinas, could say that miracles are above nature, but they would never say they were violations of nature, as if God is subject to nature. And you look in the Bible, like where God parts the sea in Exodus 14 with a strong east wind. Well, how is that a violation of nature? Wind set down occurs. Now, the fact that it happens to occur at the very time when the Israelites need to cross, they cross on dry ground, and then it closes back on their enemies after them. I mean, that's, remarkable, but it's not a violation of natural law. maybe the virgin birth, maybe the Jesus' resurrection to a new order of existence. We could maybe speak of those, maybe in such terms. Walking on water, but even stilling storms are not violations of natural law. Storms still all the time. But anyway, uh, moving on to his second argument. His second argument is if these things happened then, they'd still happen. You'd have credible eyewitnesses for these things. And we don't have any credible eyewitnesses for these things. The only places where people believe in these things are primitive, superstitious people. And here his ethnocentrism, there are reasons why even a century after him, slaveholders were quoting Hume in support of slavery and in support of the inferiority of non-white peoples. Um, his whole view of history was so ethnocentric. He's, no great civilizations with art and all these things, technology apart from white civilizations. Well, he defines Egypt as a white civilization. What about China? What about, there were other empires in Africa, other empires in Asia that he just, and in Latin America, well, wasn't Latin, well, it was Latin by that point, but anyway,
Yeah.
South America and Central America, but and then there are other components of that, but he couldn't get away with that today. He says, oh yeah, and you've got this example and that example, but we can dismiss those. So, for example, he says, um, I think it was Madame Perrier. I may have the wrong name, but she was Pascal's niece, and she had a running eyesore. She was touched with the holy thorn from Jesus' crown of thorns at a Jansenist monastery, instantly publicly healed from this organic condition. The Queen Mother of France in her own position who verified this. So Hume says, we know this didn't happen, so why would we accept anything else? That's his argument.
Yeah.
He doesn't even try to, he says this meets all my criteria and it doesn't work. Well, okay, I don't believe it was a holy thorn from Jesus' crown of thorns. I think Luther was probably right that there were enough nails left over from the Holy Cross to shoe every horse in Saxony, and
Yeah.
wondered why there were 13 of the original 12 apostles buried in Germany. I mean, there were a lot of fake relics
Yeah.
in circulation,
For
but it
sure.
was a contact point for her faith. It was an act of faith. She was healed, and it's medically documented. Well, today, I don't think Hume would even try this argument. There was a Pew Forum survey in 2006, I believe it was, of just 10 countries where the total number from the extrapolating the numbers from the survey, the total number of people who claim to have witnessed divine healing comes out to hundreds of millions of people in those 10 countries. And you know and then you've got it in multiple religions. That was one of his arguments against it. Well, you've got it in this religion, that religion, that religion, so they all cancel each other out. Who says that works?
Yeah, he's
But
assuming that their purpose is to authenticate the religions instead of miracles of compassion,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Atheists get
And
healed, right? So yeah.
yeah, and just yeah, and there, from theistic grounds, there are reasons for interpreting certain ones in certain ways. So presuppositions do affect how we view them, but you can't just say, well, they don't happen because everybody claims them. Wait, how does that work?
Yeah.
And and we could go on with that, but um, and also you have millions of people converted to Christianity in recent decades through. I mean, it wasn't just like somebody prayed for me, my headache went away. It was like things so dramatic that they weren't explained by these cultures' indigenous healing traditions. People embracing great social cost, abandoning centuries of certain kinds of ancestral traditions to follow Jesus, sometimes facing great persecution to do so. In around the year 2000, there was a report from within the China Christian Council, affiliated with the Three Self Church, the official, more or less official church in China, that said that half of all conversions in the previous 20 years were due to faith healing experiences. Well, there were millions of people in China converted during that time to Christianity. The house church estimates were much higher than that. Well, some of the house church estimates that I've seen were like closer to 90%, at least in rural areas. So, you know, Dr. Balkrishna uh, Sharma in Nepal shared with me, he thought it was like 80% of Christians in Nepal had been converted through healing or deliverance or something like that. And of course, you've got all over the Islamic world where people are being converted through dreams and visions, or
Yeah.
at least that's part of the conversion story. Uh,
Nabil Qureshi is a case.
I hadn't. I was about to say Nabil because he's beloved by many of us, but yeah, um, and we could go on, but
Yeah,
just to say, I don't think David Hume was a smart man. You may disagree with him, but I don't think he would have made that argument today. You go back and you read his argument, a lot of it's circular. Certainly the first half of his argument is entirely circular. But with hundreds of millions of witnesses, and he says, well, they have to be educated, have something to lose. Well, I can give you scores of examples. I mean, I'm sure there are more than scores, but I mean, I can name scores of examples of people that I know, including myself and my wife, both have PhDs, who are well educated, certainly have something to lose, sticking our neck out, talking about it in public, in circles that, I mean, not in the seminary where I teach, but in academia as a whole, um, doesn't do anything good for my reputation
no,
with a lot of people who are detractors. But I've seen it, so why should I have to keep my mouth shut about it if I believe it's true?
exactly.
Anyway,
Exactly. Yeah, no, I fully agree. And one thing I'll just quickly add about David Hume is that there's another objection that you might not have heard about, but it's from my background in philosophy, where there's a field called the epistemology of testimony. And
mm-hmm,
David Hume assumes, in fact, he invented this without realizing it, but he believes in reductive testimony. So to keep it simple, testimony is to be disbelieved unless you have independent proof that it's true. Whereas most philosophers and epistemologists today go for the non-reductive, where
right.
no, we believe it. It's a basic source of knowledge unless we have reason to doubt. So yeah,
He, his approach would make historiography impossible, and
exactly.
also journalism, and also law, and actually, for that matter, sociology and anthropology.
Exactly. And he would make it impossible for me to get pizza when I ask someone on the street for directions. I
Yeah,
trust their testimony that if they tell me it's 2 blocks down, we believe them usually, right? So yeah,
yeah, unless you have reason not to.
exactly. Exactly. So okay, so here's the my last favorite question on the list of the interview before we go to the next segment here. But so I'm kind of known for my Shroud Warriors series. I'm on the pro Shroud side with Dr. Gary Habermas. Now I remember reading in your commentary. I tried to figure out your position, and true to form, as a good scholar, I couldn't figure it out because you gave both the pro and the con. So I'm kind of curious, like what is your position on the Shroud of Turin?
Position might not be a good word for somebody who hasn't researched it as much as you have, um, but with the newer studies that deal with the radiocarbon dating, and show, yeah, it was just a patch in the shroud that was tested before, and the newer study says it's a first century cloth. At least that's my understanding of the newer
The
study.
like the X-ray dating you're talking about, right? The Waxis thing that just came out in 2022. You're
Yeah, 2022.
yeah, yeah. It
Yeah,
dates to the first century. Yeah,
yeah. So with that, I mean, I think it's everything put together. It, I don't see any other explanation that works. That's not a positive yes. It's just a I don't see anything else that works. Uh,
yeah.
I mean, obviously, this is of a crucified man. If it's of a crucified man, most crucified men don't have shrouds like this.
Mhm.
Uh, it doesn't make sense for something else. So um, I would just say, based on the current evidence, looks like it's authentic. Uh, Keeping open in case something something in the future points in a different way, but I don't know what that would be. But
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe we find out that there were medieval alchemists who had power to create a first century cloth, and
Well,
I it just
what I heard the most recent thing is Dale Allison's appeal to rainbow bodies. Somebody
yeah
tried to apply that to the shroud too. So yeah, but no, I think it's obvious. It's proof of the resurrection of
yeah
Jesus.
I don't think the rainbow I don't know, Dale wouldn't apply rainbow body to the shroud, would he? I don't think that would work.
I don't think it would work
The
either, right?
shroud.
'Cause, yeah, the body shrink and all it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So all right, cool. So with that said, that's it for sort of the interview proper on this show. All right, hello. So that does it for the four broken up parts of my interview with Dr. Craig Keener. And again, it was a great interview. I really enjoy having Craig on the show, and hopefully he'll be on in the future at some point. Um, but yeah, so that's it for this part. Tune in next week where I'll post up the full 2.5 hour interview of Craig Keener as a single show with my usual format. And included in that will be some bonus content that wasn't included in the four broken up bits. So make sure you tune into that. Just, if nothing else, to hear the bonus bit that was I did with Craig Keener after the interview proper. All right. That said, have a great week, everybody. And as I said, next week I'll be posting up my full interview with the bonus content with Dr. Craig Keener. And I'm doing a show with an expert on the numerical patterns in the Bible. So the Vulture will be joining me as a co-host, and he's brought on an expert on the numerical patterns in the Bible. So that'll be on the Friday, February the 7th. So tune in on Friday for that. And otherwise, have a great week, everybody. And and then the following week, Dr. Lydia McGrew will be coming back to have her resurrection discussion with the skeptic David Kemble Cook on Bayes' theorem. So that's what we got coming up in the next couple weeks. And then after that, we have some great shows in the works. So Shroud of Turin related as well. So wait for that. All right. Bye-bye.